Okay, members, good afternoon. As we're not quorate for decision making, but only for taking evidence, we are going to change the running order around a bit to accommodate the junior ministers. And we'll pick up on agenda item 7, which is a ministerial briefing on age discrimination legislation. A written statement to the Assembly on the 19th of February saw the First and Deputy First Ministers announce the decision to take forward proposals to prohibit unjustifiable age differentiated practices against people aged 16 and over by those providing goods, facilities and services. Members, in your pack at page 93 is a copy of that statement. You'll be aware some organisations, including the Commissioner for Children and Younger People and Include Youth, had previously indicated their disappointment that children and young people under the age of 16 were to be excluded from the remit of the legislation. And you will recall also at our meeting on the 2nd of March, we agreed to invite the junior ministers to brief us on the matter. So I'm delighted to welcome the junior ministers, Junior Minister Bell, Junior Minister McCann, you're both very welcome. Joan Hardy and Margaret Rose McNaughton as officials also join in. Ministers, would you care to make some opening comments?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank the Chair to give us the opportunity to update you on the age discrimination legislation. The written statement made by the First and Deputy First Minister on the 19th of February gave a commitment to extend legislation to give legal protection from unfair age discrimination to those aged 16 and over by those providing goods, facilities and services. It also announced the intention to bring forward a consultation document setting out proposals for legislation. Our proposed consultation is a first step towards ensuring that anti-discrimination legislation is brought forward as soon as possible to protect people over the age of 16 from harmful and unjustifiable age discrimination. It is important to say that there are a lot of very challenging issues for people from the age of 16 to 18, and we recognise that this is a step forward. We also recognise that the decision on the scope of the proposed legislation has come as a big disappointment to some people and some organisations who represent them, and we will continue to work with a wide range of people within the children and young persons sector and to seek to redress issues affecting those children that are under the age of 16. Our proposal to extend age discrimination to those aged 16 and 17 represents a significant improvement on the age discrimination legislation currently in place both in Britain and in the south of Ireland, where the under 18s are excluded from protection. It will also bring protection from age discrimination in the provision of goods, facilities and services for this age group, in line with the protections already in place in relation to employment and vocational training. Subject to ministerial and executive approval, we hope to issue the consultation document as soon as possible after the election. And I just want to turn to Jonathan now.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the committee for the invitation to be with you. The consultation document will be drafted on the basis that the proposed legislation will apply, as Jennifer has said, to people aged 16 and over. Those responding to the consultation document will be encouraged to express their views on our policy proposals, and we will ask them to think carefully about the impact that those proposals will have. We will be asking them to tell us if our proposals are the right ones, and if they are not, how should they be changed. The consultation will last for a minimum of 12 weeks. The Equality Impact Assessment will be completed in line with Section 75 and Schedule 9 obligations and Equality Commission guidelines, and will consider the impacts on each of the 9 groups and on various categories within the Section 75. So for age, consideration will be given to the impact on those not covered by the proposed legislation. Our officials will be meeting key stakeholders over the next few weeks to discuss the development of the EQIA. And we are very aware that many stakeholders are anxious to see legislation outlawing age discrimination in the provision of goods, facilities and services progressed as quickly as possible. Prior to consulting on our policy proposals, there can be no guarantee that the legislation will be delivered within this mandate. At the conclusion of the policy consultation process, we will then consider all the options available to us for bringing this legislation before the Assembly. Members will know that the Assembly will have control over the timetable of the passage of the legislation, Chairman, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have on this.
Okay, thank you very much. I thank you both. I certainly do, but I'm going to pass in the first instance to Chris Little, the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Junior Ministers, for your presentation. It's welcome, overdue statement that we're having the consultation process. I haven't participated in the pensioners' platform or Parliament on a number of occasions. I'm aware just how big an issue this is to the older persons sector, and I know a lot of people are going to welcome the commencement of this consultation. They'll probably be somewhat concerned by the lack of guarantee that it will be delivered prior to the Assembly election in 2016. However, as you alluded to, there are many people that are disappointed about the exclusion of people under the age of 16 from legislation to prohibit age discrimination on the grounds of age and delivery of goods, facilities and services. And can I ask you what the evidence base was for excluding people under the age of 16 from the proposals?
So go ahead.
Well, I mean, I share and you've heard me say it and publicly, both the sectors and other members in the chamber who actually said I share that. I would have been much preferred to have been able to say we were dealing with this particular legislation that would exclude nobody and would be for everybody. Having said that, I would hope this would be a first step. I believe any evidence and research that was done, in my opinion, actually would be in favour of it including everybody. And I don't believe, I think that obviously any sort of legislation around discrimination, to start off with discriminating against a particular group, in my opinion, isn't a very good way to go forward. Unfortunately, we didn't get the political consensus to do that. So, I mean, all I can say is that this does go a bit further than the legislation that's currently in place for this particular goods, facilities and services in the south of Ireland and in Britain. I do believe that that is a first step, and certainly that we'll be working with the sector to enable it to go to a place where we will be able to get agreement to take it to include everybody.
That's a very good question. I would also endorse the work that the Pensioners' Parliament have undertaken. They've been one of the most robust groups presenting coherent, intelligent argument in favour of this legislation. I would dearly hope there are things I can control and there's timetables that the Assembly controls, but I would dearly hope that in 2016, personally, we can go back and have delivered on what we told the Pensioners' Parliament, and there'd be no lack of commitment on our part to try to make sure that happens. The legislation, I believe, will take us to a far better place than we currently are. If your question in terms of under 16s is there work to be done there? Yes, there is. There's a lot of work to be done, because the one thing that doesn't stay static, as we all know, is our age. You know, the time this committee meeting's over, we'll all have aged. And probably more by the way I'm speaking, but the reality is it's one. So there are a number of complexities with that. And what I want to do is make sure that we actually get that right. So as Jennifer has pointed out, in the Republic of Ireland, the Equal Status Acts 2000-2004 outlaws discrimination for over 18s. And the rest of the UK, England, Scotland and Wales, the Equality Act 2010, again outlaws discrimination in the age for over 18s. And there are different examples, like Australia, where covers all ages, and also in Canada, where provision can vary dependent on territories. So what we want to do is make sure the legislation we get right, that the relevant exemptions that are needed for under 16s, we also can ensure that we get right. But we'll be taking it to a better place than anywhere else in these islands than we were before. And I regard this very much as a step that we're taking in the right direction. And we will continue. We have a very positive communication, critical communication, but constructively critical communication from the Children's Commissioner's Office and some of the youth organisations that have spoken to us. We will continue a dialogue with them to take this forward. I would hope that we could get this legislation, as I say, to the Vice Chair, passed within the mandate of this Assembly, and it will take us to a better place than anywhere else in these islands. And we will continue to work not only with the groups, but also constructively with the committee to see what we need to do in terms of under-16s.
Okay. Yeah, I welcome that. I'm sure the Assembly and this committee will work in a timely fashion to support passage in every way that we can, but that wasn't really exactly my question. In fairness, that what you suggested back to me, it wasn't what more work needs to be done, it was what work has been done to provide an evidence base and a rationale for the exclusion of people that were under 16.
The work that we have currently been doing is not only with the children's organisations, it's also with some of the legal experts in the field, and we also have been looking around what exemptions are necessary for young people to take them out of the legislation. And I would suggest the evidence is leading us that there would be necessary to have more exemptions there to the legislation to protect children, and that's the work and evidence that we're working on.
Okay, well, I mean that's something to go on. When we took evidence, there was strong argument to suggest that exemptions could be delivered and are deliverable in order to avoid having to exclude under 16-year-olds, and that could be part of the legislative process. Is there any consideration of that taking too long in the legislative process, or can you help us understand further why you didn't decide to make inclusion of the exemptions as part of this legislative process and avoid excluding under 16-year-olds?
Yeah, we did look at the holistically, and then we also had to look at where we would strive for perfection and where we could strive to get what was possible. And I was conscious of a very strong, within the age sector, a number of different views were expressed, and one particularly was that we should do something and do it now and get it through legislation in place. I also had people saying to me we should withhold the legislation until we got an absolutely perfect model that could apply to everybody. So it was a question in relation to timescale and making sure we got the legislation right. And I think the political consensus, and there is different views right across, I'm very supportive of a lot of what the children's sector brought forward to us. And I would like to see that work progress. There is no bar to doing further legislation in respect of this, and it needs to be comprehensively looked at. But in terms of getting a bill through, where we've got the level of agreement and where we've got the sort of necessary drafting thought through and what we can do and what is possible to do within this mandate, I think this is the best of what we can deliver, and it was on that basis of political consensus we brought it forward.
Okay, that's the question, Chair. As someone who supports the extension of legislation to all ages, is there a timetable in place for likely delivery of inclusion of young people in this legislation, if and when appropriate exemptions can be achieved?
Well, I mean, when you're talking about what evidence and what evidence base and what research was used, we had very long discussions with the like of Robert Allen QC. He brought, and obviously the Equality Commission and the Children's Commissioner and the Older Persons Commissioner. But the three organisations, the Equality Commission and the Children's Commission, actually brought forward their views, and I have to say, made a good argument about just what you're saying about inclusion of everybody, as did Robert Allen, and the exemptions and everything else, you know, was all discussed, and it was, I mean, I have to say, it's no surprise to this committee that was what was the delay was in bringing this forward. We were trying to get to a place where we could work, where everybody would be included and the exemptions that were needed could be put in. But I mean, my view, and I mean, obviously I can only speak for myself in terms of as Junior Minister and the party that I represent, you know, we are very, very, you know, very, very determined, very committed to try to work through this to get it to include everybody, and we see this as a first step. Even getting to 16 was you know, if you like, a positive, because you know it was starting from 18. Sorry, for over 18s only. So I think that I would see this as a work in progress. That's the way I would view this, and I would hope that it wouldn't be too long before we have the legislation that would include everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
You both made clear that since the announcement on the 19th of February, you've had engagement with spokespeople for children and younger people. I think it would be very worthwhile, very useful, if you could give us a real flavour of what they have been saying to you, so that we can be assured you're getting the same message that we have been getting as individuals and as party politicians.
The work of the Children's Commission include youth, opportunity youth, and a number of groups that we've met both formally as ministers, and I think many of us have met informally in our party political hats as well. Overwhelmingly the desire, and I doubt very much they would give the committee a different perspective as they do ours, because they're organisations that have a proven track record of integrity. The overwhelmingly desire is strongly to outlaw age discrimination on any age, and there is a feeling that the necessary exemptions can be obtained to protect children.
Would that include an expression of disappointment?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say extreme disappointment, and I would also add that they have, said to us they feel that it is discriminating against those young people under 16. They've very clearly said that.
Yeah, and I think what the way that this should be framed from all of us is that this is a work in progress. We'll have delivered more for over the 16 to 18 age group. I think the last census had them about 49,000. More than has ever been before. We'll have the most progressive legislation of either GB or the Republic, and that there is also a strong commitment to a work in progress, and all of the organisations have agreed, and we have agreed as ministers, that our door remains open to them to work through these issues.
I was taken, Mr. Bell, by your reference to the EQIA, the Equality Impact Assessment. Is it possible that that assessment will say it is illegal to do this?
When we looked at it and we got the political consensus to take this forward and to do it within this time frame, it would be our understanding that we can do this. I'm not going to speak in advance of the impact assessment being undertaken, but it's possible for us to do this.
Does that mean it is also possible that they could say you cannot do this or should not do this?
I think both of those are possible.
Okay.
Well, in terms of it's illegal, the information I have at the moment is that there's nothing saying to me this is illegal. I wouldn't have brought it forward if that was the case. But if there is going to be a negative impact, which is a concern, that we have to look at what measures there are that could mitigate that impact, or where there could be other measures taken to achieve better equality of opportunity. But I think, just without prejudging, I think there will be, because it's already been expressed to me, a measure of disappointment. And I also think there will be a strong desire, not only on our part, but in other groups' parts, to see what we can do to take that forward in further legislation.
So for those who are looking to the EQIA as some sort of saviour for the under-16s, it's not a question of the EQIA necessarily saying yes or no. There is a kind of middle ground where they might say, if I put it this way, yes, but, the but being mitigating actions. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Megan Fair.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think first of all we have to obviously welcome the protections that we'll bring forward for older people who've been waiting for a considerable amount of time for it. But it is disappointing that this hasn't happened for all, and there is a huge amount of work to be done in terms of including under 16s. In my opinion, it could have been done now. It's disappointing that it wasn't. And it's already been said, it makes absolutely no sense to discriminate within a piece of anti-discrimination legislation, but that's where we are. But in terms of the future, will we see future legislation to ensure inclusion, or is there, if support isn't there for it now, will support be there for it down the line?
Well, I think that the consultation, once the consultation goes out, obviously the QIA will be looking at the Section 75 groups, for instance, that are there, and obviously young people are one of those groups as well. So I think that once it goes out to consultation, the scope of the legislation has now got political consensus, albeit that maybe it would have been preferable to be different, but it is where it is. So I think that once the consultation then is agreed and goes out, I think that just going back to what the Chair says, people's going to have their opportunity then. And the legal people, I'm sure too, will be putting their views across then. And I think that then we're going to have to look at that and see what people are telling us and what people, I mean, that's what a whole consultation on anything is about, you know what I mean? It's for people to have their say on something, and it's for all that to sort of be taken into consideration as we go forward. I would hope, I mean, that's all I can say. I would just hope that we will be, at some time soon, be in a place where we can put legislation, age discrimination legislation for goods, facilities and services, which will include everybody. And that's, I can't give a timeline on it, do you know what I mean? I can't do that, but that's certainly what I'll be working towards, trying to do, and we have discussed this with people in the sector, both sectors, by the way, because the thing I think it's very important as well, that at no time did any of the older people's sector want to see the exclusion of anybody either. You know, I think I just want to make that and clarify that point, that, you know, they too wanted this to include everybody. So there was nobody actually coming and saying that they wanted a certain age group to be excluded. So I think it's important to put that on the record as well.
No, I mean, Megan, I share some of the concerns that you've outlined. Can we make progress on it? I think we can, because some of the things that were originally suggested to us that were concerns of parents and groups and people that provided care for children. When we've gone through the process of teasing these out, and Jennifer and I have spent hours in this with the likes of Rob and Alan QC, but also with other experts in relation to that, some of the concerns that existed, we've been able to see where we can put a necessary exemption in that would both support parents, support children, and also lead us to be able to properly get a piece of legislation there. We're not there yet, but I'm confident we can make progress on it.
Well, in terms of the consultation process and that was referred to, will we see questions around children and young people, or will that sector be consulted? Or
I have no difficulty. Any question get into consultation whatsoever? No.
And it's open by the nature of a consultation. It's open, and we have a reasonably regular engagement with the children's organisations. And they are a constructively critical friend of ours, and I think that's the best relationship we can have, and we intend to continue that.
Can I ask just a couple of follow-ups on the consultation? First of all, will the committee get sight of the consultation paper before it's issued?
We are hopeful. The officials will be meeting with the sector next week with the draft consultation, you know, obviously to get their views before it being finalised. And we would be hopeful that once that meeting takes place, the committee could certainly have access. It would be obviously a draft consultation, it wouldn't be, but certainly, I mean, if the once that takes place with the sector, it's just protocol that you deal with the sector first, basically.
Yes, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
The second point is the hard to reach groups. Have you thoughts on how you reach out to those people?
Well, there will be. I mean, the consultation period will, as it stands, it will be 12-week consultation period. And as in previous consultations, you know, that we have done, we have made, you know, officials available. We've been at them ourselves for questions and that. So we will be going out to people. It's not just going to be, it'll be a live document, but it'll be actually we'll be going out explaining it to people, allowing people to ask questions as well.
So is it going to run over the summer?
I'm not sure about the actual will run over the summer. There's a difficulty with the elections at the minute, and that's why, you know, because just just the protocols in it, but hopefully, I can't foresee, because there's been a lot of work done, and I have to say, in terms of the officials, it's, you know, I have to praise the officials. They've done quite a lot of work from this. The political consensus has been agreed in terms of taking this forward. So I think that really what we're looking at is trying to get that work completed and to get it through. But obviously, once the executive agrees for it to go out and everything else, that it will actually do that.
Can I also say, just in relation to your first point, which is a good one in terms of how we reach the hard-to-reach young people, we do engage a number of organisations. The difficulty, you don't want to sort of mention one organisation because there's a lot of good work being undertaken, but some of their specific outreach work is with hard-to-reach young people. And one of the groups that we will make ourselves available to as ministers is particularly with those sections that are hard to reach in relation to it. We hope to have the consultation document finalised, just to give you an exact time frame, in the next couple of weeks. Then we've got to take it to the executive to seek the approval to consult. We cannot consult before the election, but we hope to have the document out shortly afterwards. And And obviously, can I say, I think everybody knows it in the room, but any option to take forward legislation in this mandate would require the accelerated passage procedure, which can only be done with the support of your committee chairman and also with the approval of the Assembly.
Which was my next question. So you may ask for accelerated.
I think there.
Or you will ask?
Yeah, well,
stage. You think you will?
Let's have the consultation first. I don't want to prejudge that. But I think all of us are, and everybody's listening to many of the groups in the age sector, and they are unanimous in terms of people that I've been speaking to in trying to have something done within this mandate. And I personally think we would feel them terribly if we went out in 2016 and dissolved and then sought fresh elections without a piece of legislation, particularly when it is through accelerated passage within our gift to do it within this mandate and take us to a better place than we were in 2011 and a better place than there is in GB or in the Republic.
And as you say, let's not prejudge the consultation. And after all, you can expect older people will react, and as you're saying, they didn't want the under-16s excluded. We can assume anybody representing under-16s is likely to call for it, so there may be an overwhelming call to change. Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're all in a quandary in terms of where we're at, because I do appreciate the political sensitivities between the junior ministers, how they respond to questions and how they present their arguments. So I understand all that, and I'm not expecting to be anything other than diplomatic as they are today and sensitive to each other's position. But whilst we are in a quandary, I would have personally have no doubt, having engaged with a wide range of people, again, that there would be probably an overwhelming support for all-inclusive anti-discrimination legislation in terms of GPFS. I would have no doubt whatsoever. And in fact, my conversation with some of the senior citizens representatives made it very clear to me that they were also wanting it to include all age groups. But they were very reluctantly of the view that, well, if there can't be agreement to do that, at least they would like to have something for the senior citizens which they represent. And I understand that, but I do hope, and I would use this committee meeting this afternoon to have a call for the public, particularly all of the stakeholders, to make a very strong representation to the consultation, because I think I don't see a single shred of evidence which defends the imposition of legislation which excludes a range of age groups, everybody from 16 years under. I don't see any evidence at all to defend that position. I think it's purely a political position, which is fair enough, but I don't think it's justifiable, and I certainly don't agree with it. So I, first of all, hope that we do get a strong representation of groups responding to the consultation. I'm not sure what the scope of the consultation might be. I know you addressed this earlier on, but I would like to have it clarified today whether or not the terms of the consultation does allow people to say they would like, for example, if that's what their position is, to want this legislation to include all age groups. So is that facilitated in the legislation? Because I don't know if it is or not. Because my view would be that if we, I know people are saying that they would like to maybe think about this later on. As I say, I'm in the quandary, same as everybody else. I very much welcome legislation which brings some people into protection of the law under GFS, this proposed legislation, particularly as it relates to people from 16 years up. So I do think that clearly is a breakthrough and very welcome itself. But at the same token, I would be worried that if, for example, you don't pass it in this mandate, and you do pass it in the following mandate, then that means to me that you're talking about at least 6 years before you become back to legislation again, because I can't see you bringing two separate bills in the next mandate on GFS. I can't see it. It would be doable, clearly, but I just think I'm flagging that up, so you could conceivably be kicking this back then for a number of years later. Having said all of that, I think it was Margaret Rose at one point in one of the earlier evidence sessions did suggest that there were policies and strategies in there which could be looked at and rebooted and refreshed, which, short of legislation, could actually go to redress some of the deficiencies out there and protections for people. So I would like some commitment to that, at least, to be undertaken in parallel with whatever we do in terms of the legislation post the consultation. because I do think there's still a lot more yet could be done. I mean, I find it incomprehensible because you could conceivably have a family with a senior citizen who will be benefiting from this particular piece of legislation because they're getting rights and protections to, for example, certain access to health. That same family could have a young person under 16 who still been denied the same access. I can't understand how we can actually say that to that family with a straight face. Actually, no, but this is what we have an offer for you. So I'm just making a point. I do very much welcome the fact that we are potentially introducing legislation which will at least include people from 16 years of age up. I think that's a breakthrough. I don't really believe that there's any evidence to defend that position ultimately, and I would want some assurance that two things. First of all, that the consultation will be open for people who want to respond on as wide a range of options as they feel appropriate for themselves. And secondly, then, what other policies and strategies can be looked at in conjunction with the young person sector to see how we can, even now short of legislation, effectively redress some of the problems that they've identified, and some of them are quite severe.
Can I just pick up on a point about the consultation? There's been no sort of agreed questions as such yet for the consultation. So even what people are saying here today, that will inform that as we go forward. And again, I mean, we need to wait till after the consultation because, you're totally right in terms of people have to express their opinion. I've listened to very, very strong opinions from all sectors in and around the issue of the excluding of under 16s, and I've listened to even some colleagues here as MLAs and making them very strong as well. I think that we need to wait till the consultation because we won't be in a position until then to have that robust policy position either. So I think that it's a bit premature, if you like, to say. For us to come here to say this is the way it's going to, develop and this is what's going to happen, we'd be very, very keen to wait until after the consultation response come back. But certainly your input and anything that's going to actually inform what questions and that's going to be asked is certainly welcome as well, as is anybody's, and that's open, as I say, because the questions aren't actually set in stone as to what's going to be in it.
Consultation process will be open to all. And I share some of the concerns that have been expressed. So I think if you're looking to see the consultation be open to all, people can respond exactly how they feel and how they wish. There's no barrier, there's nobody's going to say you can't. And then we'll look at that. But also we'll continue a parallel process, which I think what you were suggesting is that we continue a parallel process to work with our young people, to listen to their voices, and to work with the relevant youth organisations through their representatives to see how we can continue to make progress in this area. I see it as politics as the art of the possible. We have it within our gift in the Northern Ireland Assembly to pass a piece of legislation through accelerated passage that would take us better than either GB or the Republic of Ireland. It would be a more progressive piece and give people the protections that they need. And we can continue that progress to look at what we need to do in the future for those who are under 16.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think to be fair about it, before the 19th of February, nobody was getting anything. Now, with this announcement, at least some groups in our society, pending consultation and the rest, will be in a better place, albeit tinged with a little sadness or regret that others are not getting there. And I do want to acknowledge the unique nature of the department of the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. You are a joint office, and inevitably there will be policy issues on which you cannot agree. What I would like to do in finishing this section is give you an opportunity to address anyone, particularly in the younger persons sector, who might suspect, am I actually being used as a political football? Is there a trade-off somewhere else that has led to this compromise agreement?
Definitely not. I mean, if that's what you're suggesting, no. But I mean,
no, I'm just giving you the opportunity to assure people.
Well, I have 3 teenagers myself, and I mean, I think that like most people, what we're trying to do is bring legislation forward in anything that we do, we're trying to have the best impact for the most people that are out in our communities. It's about the quality of life for people, and it's about protecting the rights of people. And as I said, I'm very, very keen to move it forward, that it will include all young people. I've worked for years with young people. I know the way they're discriminated against, and I know the way that young people, for instance, in terms of mental health services, in terms of when some of them go into shops, the way they're looked on and the way they're treated. So I'm very, very keen that those young people have the same protections as everybody else, because they're entitled to it as a human right, in my opinion, for that. And I think that you know, it certainly was not a trade-off. We're trying to do our best, as you said. We couldn't get the political consensus, anything beyond 16 plus. And we're trying to say to people, we realise that even between 16 and 18, there's a lot of issues affecting young people, and we're hopeful that this year will go in some way to help that. But certainly, you know, we're trying our best to ensure that all people have those protections, and that's with anything that we're bringing forward.
No, there's been no discussions, and I can give you that assurance comprehensively, Chairman. I mean, the legislation that we're seeking to consult on, a rough figure that I've been just calculating there, will, if I look at the NISRA mid-year population statistics from around about mid-2013, this legislation, if passed, will protect something like 1,496,526 of our people. There is a group out there of over 380,000 who are under 16, and we need to continue to progress work for them, and our commitment is to do that. But there's no discussion in relation to this in terms of anything else. Okay,
I appreciate the assurance. And we would be very keen to see the draft consultation questions, because, as Mr Maskey says, it might be something which we would like to input into. Megan wants to come back in.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to get on to this earlier. Obviously, from the point of view of older people, this is a good news story that they're finally getting. Can you give us a flavour of some of the protections that they will be?
Older people?
Yeah.
Well, I think particularly in terms of older people, one of the main areas of concern, when we were talking to them themselves and to the Commissioner for Older People, was in health and social care. You know, certain people were getting in, and because of a certain age, they weren't getting, you know, particular treatments and that. Travel insurance. Now, obviously, the insurance end of it, because it's not a devolved matter in terms of the FSA scrutiny over the lack of insurance and that. But they were also saying to us, you know, they felt that they were getting impacted on in terms of having to pay higher insurance and that. And I just think that all round, in terms of people now can't be discriminated, we have good legislation, anti-discrimination legislation there already. And I think that this will add to it. So I just think that those, but particularly in and around the health and social care sector, I know it was some, but there's a lot of, I mean, it's right across education, voluntary activities. You know, everybody will be actually more protected when they're over 16 with this legislation coming forward, and hopefully once the legislation is brought in to include everybody, because that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to make sure that protections are there for everybody.
I think the key area is that the older people sector, and it is a good news story, and I think, well, I'm happy to put my hands up and say there's much more work we need to do in this area. I'm delighted that we have a piece of legislation that takes us to a better place, one than we have ever been in, and takes us more progressively, you know, in comparison to GB or the Republic's legislation. Where the research is leading us that age discrimination exists, it's around health and social care, it's around financial services, it's around retail services, it's around accommodation. I've had older groups raising to me the concern that they have perfectly healthy, but travel insurance just spiked for them. In many cases to a point where they couldn't even get a holiday. But legislation does one thing. But a secondary part of legislation, you know, it also produces a cultural shift, and a cultural shift away from where there have been entrenched attitudes discriminating against elderly people, against attitudes and behaviours. And the legislation will do its job, but also that it can produce that cultural paradigm shift to how we view and celebrate our elderly people. And it also, the legislation prohibiting discrimination also brings us into line with many international obligations and principles, including the United Nations principles for older people.
Well, I suppose in terms of the cultural shift, that's where intergenerational work is important and comes in. So hopefully on the back of it we can work together to try and improve on that and include everyone at the end of it.
Strong point. Can I say too, just to Chairman, if there is any redraft following the discussion with the stakeholders on Monday, if there is to be anything, but after that, I think it's our intention as Ministers to instruct the officials to get that document too.
Appreciate it. There is one other issue I believe you're willing to tackle, which is the Minority Ethnic Development Fund. As I think you're aware, one of your officials briefed the committee on the 18th of March and gave the very clear impression that any group receiving funding under the 2014-15 financial year would continue to receive that funding until the 15-16 fund was up and running. In fact, when he was challenged about the potential gap, he said, no. The extension will be until the decisions are made and grant awards are indicated. But we have since received indication from your department that this is not the case, that the funding finished at the end of the last financial year, and successful applicants will not be aware of whether they're successful or not until May, at which point they will have the gap refunded. Why, first of all, why the change from what we were told on the 18th of March?
Well, I'm not sure who was at the committee on the 18th of March?
Mr. Fraser.
Right, Ken, right. This all I can give you is the situation as I know it now. I mean, I don't know and I'm not saying that what you read out wasn't what he said.
Well, it's the official record.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But what is happening is, because the Minority Ethnic Fund, we've actually got it now that people who are currently being funded by that obviously ended on the 31st of March. That funding run out basically. And like most organisations and most groups that work in the community and that, what you normally would do if there's a gap in funding and if you can't get that gap secured, you're actually running your organisation at risk, what's called at risk. So the people who are running their organisation at risk, if you like, and who are successful, and we are hoping mid-May those successful organisations will be told, which gives about 6 weeks from the 31st of March till then that will be backdated, the money will be backdated to them, but the groups that aren't successful won't. So those groups that are taking the risk of running post 31st of March with their funding, they will not be reimbursed if they aren't successful in the fund. And that is the way that it's working. So I don't know why Ken would have said, you know, that at that meeting. I mean, I can't speak for him. I'll have to go back and ask him, but that is
let's
my understanding of it as it is now.
To one side, and let me ask you this. I understand some groups who perhaps were in receipt in a previous financial year might be unsuccessful for the current year. That's fine. My concern is a group who's running at risk and who will be successful. Why should they fund the gap when you've got all the money and they don't?
They won't fund the gap. We will backdate the money to the 1st of April.
They have to cover between the 1st of April and when you make the decision. No. Why do they have to run at risk because of the inefficiency of your department or your department's inability to bring forward a new scheme in a timely manner?
I think what our understanding of it was, Chairman, was that officials had said that they were considering the options that were available, which included a funding extension for the Minority Ethnic Development Fund when they came to the committee on the 18th of March. There was a number of options put to us, and we decided that in balance it was time to open up a full year's funding for all of the organisations within the sector. Now, there is many demands from those who have been funded and obviously want to continue to be funded, and those who aren't. And it's important to know that where we are under extreme financial pressure. Everybody is, and the committee knows that. My pleasure is that we were able to confirm that the Minority Ethnic Development Fund remained at 1.1 million for the 2015-16 financial year, and that doesn't include crisis funding of £100,000. The Minority Ethnic Development Fund, it opened for applications. I think it'll close. Those applications will close on the 27th of April. The Racial Equality Unit are this week. They've been holding drop-in clinics for potential applicants in Belfast, Londonderry, Craigavon. And we will try and ensure that decisions on the funding allocations will be made shortly after the closing date, and the groups will be informed by mid-May. And that reaffirms, I think, not only in financial terms, but how we've gone about it and sought the year's funding, because many other groups wanted that length of funding.
Do you consider this a timely decision?
I think it's the best decision to keep the funding where it is. There is a balance. We have met many of the groups, and some of the groups would have different views of how they want it. We've got to take the best decision for the future. The decision we took was to maintain the fund at 1.1 million, to put £100,000 into a crisis fund to help those who are most in need. I think that shows a strong and reaffirms a strong commitment to promoting racial equality, and where we have said, in order to prevent a gap in funding, awards were successful, be backdated to 2015.
Where do the groups get the finance to operate at risk over these weeks?
Well, groups, and we're led to believe in this particular fund. And I've worked in the community sector. This happens right across the community sector. It's not just, but like that. What you're saying, is it timely? No, it wasn't timely. We have to say it shouldn't have happened, and it should have been brought forward much quicker. And I acknowledge that, and apologise for any groups that and have spoken to some of the groups, and have had meetings with them, and they were very, very concerned just of what you're saying. But the thing is that they work at risk, and that is the way that in terms of those 6 weeks or whatever. But we're led to believe in this particular fund that will only be a handful of organisations. Now, that's still not good enough. It's still a handful of organisations, but they operate from the reserves. That's what they do.
I think, too, to be helpful...
If they have them, yeah, they operate.
So you can't guarantee to me, Minister, that a group might not fold over this period?
I can't guarantee that any group might not fold. I mean, I couldn't sit here and give...
Specifically through the lack of funding from the Minority Ethnic Development Fund.
I think the best thing that we can say where we are at the minute is that it's our understanding from the evidence that we possess in the Ministerial Office that there's only a handful of organisations that risk finding themselves in the position that you're in, because, and the basis of that is that the pattern of claims that we've had for the Minority Ethnic Development funding in the past suggests that it shouldn't be problematic, because most of the organisations that are claiming are claiming on a, no more frequently than on a quarterly basis.
Right. Would you like to tell us who is at risk then, as you obviously have the research?
Well, what you're asking me to do is, when there's drop-in clinics and when there's decisions still to be made, to speculate on what the outcome of those decisions aren't. What I can tell you factually is that we believe, it's our understanding, that only a handful of organisations are at risk. And the reason that we're saying that is that the funding in the past and the pattern of claims for that funding suggests that it shouldn't be a problematic issue, because most of those organisations are claiming no more than quarterly.
It just seems to me that because the financial year end is not a movable feast, it's highly predictable when a yearly fund runs out, and you could therefore be timely in your assessments. And I accept money is tight and there are competing pressures. I absolutely accept it.
Yep.
Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. It's obviously not the first time OFMDFM has failed to properly administer vital, albeit modest, funding for building a united community and achieving racial equality in Northern Ireland. So what reasons led to the fund not being called for adequately in advance of the financial year end?
I'm not sure of... Can you give me an example of where money hasn't been issued appropriately?
I said administer.
Where it hasn't been administered?
You're past the community. There's been
I don't understand.
Numerous issues with community good relations.
No, you made a statement there that money has not been administered appropriately. Can you give me one single example?
Properly administered.
Okay,
I would argue
give me one simple
that proper administration is well enough in advance of the year end to allow organisations to plan
you made a statement
properly.
that money has not been properly administered. Have you a single example of that?
Okay, if you need me to replace properly with timely, I'm happy to do that.
No, I
don't think it changes the issue that we're trying to get to. My question is, why the delay?
The issue, I do think it's an issue, because if you're saying to me, without any evidence base, that money hasn't been properly administered, I think that's a very serious charge, Chairman.
Okay, if
and
you need me to replace that with timely, I will do that in order to get to what the issue actually is here, which why is the delay being happening?
You're the Vice Chairman of a committee. You made a very strong statement, and I think you should review your statement.
Okay, look,
and come back to me at a further stage.
No, just a second. I think the Deputy Chair has reviewed it to timely. He has reviewed.
Absolutely, Chair. To get to what the issue at hand actually is, I will replace
Chairman,
that with
we are
timely
under,
administration.
as you've
I'm
put
asking
out-
what the delay
No,
was.
you all understand the difficulty that there is with the financial pressures that we're under. I mean, there has been the most difficult budget round. We have looked at a loss of funding in significant numbers. And I think what we have done is we have protected the Minority Ethnic Development Fund at 1.1 million. I think we have put crisis funding in place. And yes, I accept some organisations would like something done differently. And I think there are other organisations involved in racial equality and ethnic development and are using that fund would like it to do it this way. I'm satisfied that we have had to make a judgment and that this is the right conclusion.
Can I just add, in terms of the funding and the timeliness of the funding, and I take your point in terms of our responsibility, because this is a fund that we oversee in the OFMDFM, but there has been issues right across departments. ESF funding, for instance, in Dale, DRD funding in DRD. So there are issues with
So what funding in DRD?
Sorry?
What DRD funding in DRD?
In DRD, well, funding in terms of services for the roads and maintenance and everything else, because I know as constituents have came to me, and I've been told when I've approached organisations that are responsible for them that there has been they don't know whether they're going to get the funding at that stage to do the work that's needed for communities. And I'm not trying to, but I'm just trying. What I'm trying to say is we take responsibility for this, and I've already said it shouldn't have happened, and I'm certainly apologising for it to happen to the groups out there that need the money, because I know how hard pressed groups are in the community, and they do excellent work, sterling work, and they can't do the work. And sometimes you're right, some of them don't have the money to do it at risk from reserves and everything else. But all I'm saying is these budgetary decisions are right across the board in all departments. That's just the point I want to make. But I do take responsibility for this one in particular.
Okay, appreciate that.
Just one last question. Are there organisations who have been doing vital work as a result of receipt of the funding who will not be able to survive the 6 weeks at which your process is asking them to operate at risk under?
I think there are a number of organisations out there that are doing vital work, and there's also a number of organisations who weren't successful in the initial bids to the Minority Ethnic Development Fund, who also could be doing vital work. I don't prejudge the outcome of the assessments that are currently being undertaken.
Okay. Please.
Sorry, it's just I'm trying to get a sense of it, because I would have thought that I certainly share the view. Worked with a number of organisations which rely heavily on this particular fund, but and there may be some projects which may not continue if they're not funded. But does that mean the core funding of an organisation is also gone? Because I don't see it that way. Again, I share the same concerns as the organisations who might have to run a risk and who may or may not get a successful outcome of their bid. But just trying to establish for accuracy here, really, or scale of things. I wouldn't have thought that if some of those groups don't get some funding it's more funding for projects that they're involved in, as opposed to their core business as an organisation. So the question as to why our organisations are going to go out of business, because I'm conscious this is a public session here as well, so I don't want to be having it out there unnecessarily that there may well be well-established organisations going to the wall because of this.
That's why I said
it's important to clarify that for people, because it is equally potentially, not saying dangerous, but potentially very negative to indicate out there, there'll be organisations going to the wall. May well be very projects may not succeed, and that we wouldn't want to see that. But I think it's important to set the record.
I think I've said 3 times, I'll say it again. My understanding is that only a small number of organisations would be affected. And the basis for why I said that was because most of the organisations claim quarterly. There is a lot of good work that was being undertaken and funded. And I'm also aware of a lot of groups that want to undertake essential work that weren't able to get through in the last time, who may or may not apply this time. So while the process is being undertaken, I don't think we can prejudge it.
Okay, members, I think we'll cut it there. Junior Ministers, thank you very much. And Joan and Margaret Rose, appreciate your time. Thank you. Members, As you know, we have gone off east in terms of the agenda. Can I ask our members... Sorry, excuse me. So, Brenda, I just want to... Are you going to be available for...
The rest of the session?
Rest of the session?
I am, Chair.
The rest, because we do have decisions to make about the NIPSO bill, but that will be in closed session. If members have the time, I would propose to go through everything else and then put NIPSO on at the end rather than go from open to close back to open. Okay? Okay, thank you, members. So, just to recap then, we've had apologies from Bronwyn McGann and Michael Copeland. Are we aware of any others? Brenda?
I'm Stephen Mitry.
Stephen Mitry. Thank you. Members, on page 46, there's a request from Children in Northern Ireland to meet with me as Chair to discuss policy responsibilities for childcare and children and young people following the proposal for the reorganisation of government departments. Are members content that an informal meeting with City is arranged, and obviously anybody else who's free and available can attend? Page 47 is an invitation to a lunchtime reception. It's being hosted by Fergal McKitty, MLA, on behalf of the UK and Northern Ireland Health and Social Care.
Megan's just left, so we can't make any decisions.
Ah,
She sneak out.
She looks like she's coming back.
She's now expired, but
I'll check the session.
I catch her. Didn't actually even realise her.
it's all going very well.
So,
Regulators to be held in the Long Gallery on Tuesday the 2nd of June. Members should respond directly if they wish to attend. A list of the committee's current invitations is on page 48. Next, members' draft minutes for a meeting of the 25th of March. That's on page 50 of the meeting packs. You content to agree the draft minutes? Great. Thank you. The Minority Ethnic Development Fund we have covered. Unless members have any further comment on that, we shall press on. At our last meeting, we considered correspondence from a group of minority ethnic support organisations who had come together under the branding of Stronger Together, and they were requesting that we support a call for a 3-month extension to existing commitments to bridge the gap between the funding periods. Should we write to Stronger Together to advise that the situation has now changed and just update them on that briefing we've just had? Yeah, thank you. Page 63 is a list of outstanding correspondence. In the absence of that, I refer to the correspondence summary sheet. That's page 66. Much of the correspondence is simply to note, I would suggest, but can I draw your attention to the press release from the Department at page 80? It details the appointment of the Chair and board members to the Victims and Survivors Service. I also refer members to the departmental correspondence regarding summer camps. It's in your table pack at page 16. Any comments on correspondence?
Chair, could I just suggest that we write to the department just to seek further detail of what particular content of the summer camps will contribute towards improved community relations? There's not a lot of detail in the releases.
Specific on how it contributes to improve community relations. Members content? Okay, thank you. The draft forward work programme from now until summer recess is in your packs at page 155. Members, you'll see we've got a very busy programme. We've got to finalise our inquiry into TBUC. We've got to finish our committee stage of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. And can I suggest we also really need to invite FM and DFM to come before the end of the session. We need a review of the work of 14-15 and an overview for the final year of the mandate. So, are you content with the forward work programme, including an invitation to OFMDFM?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. So our next substantive bit of business, members, is consideration of that Children's Services Cooperation Bill. I can advise you committee staff met informally with departmental officials during the recess period to discuss progress and possible amendments. And I would actually like to put on record my thanks to the Department for the constructive approach to progress this legislation is receiving through committee stage. At our last meeting, we agreed a series of evidence sessions relating to the bill. We have 2 of those today. The first with the Commissioner for Children and Young People, and the second is with Ms Anne Godfrey, previously a professional advisor in relation to children's services planning. Next week, it's NILGA, also groups representing a health and disability perspective, and umbrella groups representing children in general. Now, we had hoped the Children's Law Centre would agree to be included in the panel of children's groups. They, on the other hand, say they have some specific points to make, and they're requesting an opportunity to brief the committee separately. So, members, would you be content to offer a 20-minute discrete session to the Children's Law Centre within next week's sessions? Yes? Okay. Well, we're due to hear from the bill sponsor and departmental officials on the 29th of the month. Mr Agnew has indicated the date may present some difficulties, as it may do for myself, actually. I understand there's also the potential for an extra plenary sitting to deal with a reservoir bill on the 29th. So, given all that, how would members feel about an extraordinary decision to hold that week's meeting on the Monday?
27th, Chair, is it?
That would be Monday the 27th. There's OFMDFM questions that day. We could go, say, 12:15 to 2, something like that.
There's also a motion scheduled for that day that may require OFMDFM related MLAs to speak on as well, scheduled for 1:50.
What was that one?
The marriage equality.
Right. At 1:50?
I believe so. I can't.
So, well,
I think so.
If we went for 12:15, we could get a bit of business done. Members content? Thank you very much. That's Monday the 27th, 12:15. Can I also ask if we're content to ask the Examiner of Statutory Rules for his assessment of the delegated powers which are contained within Mr Agnew's bill? Yes? Thank you. So, to our first briefing on the bill is from the Commissioner for Children and Young People. It's Clark's brief, page 97. Also available in your packs, a briefing paper from Nikki, page 99. A response from Nikki to the committee's call for evidence, that's page 104. An extract from the Nikki report on barriers to effective government delivery for children is page 112, and a copy of the bill, EFM and notes from Daniel Greenberg start at page 119. So from the Commission, and I'm going to do my best here in terms of pronunciation, Alison Montgomery and Kula Yuzuma.
Well done, thank you.
Kula, you're very welcome. It's your first time here, so we'll certainly welcome some opening remarks, but you've just, I think, heard the junior ministers talking about the age discrimination legislation, so would you like to react to that?
I was going to leave to react to that to the end,
okay.
but I'm just to get this out of the way because we're here, but I'm very, very, very happy, 3 verys, to comment on the Minister's proposal for age GFS.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, so we'll leave the age discrimination legislation to the very, very end.
We'll do this
I think
quickly.
Megan needs to...
No, I'll just be back in a minute.
It's okay, we're in evidence session, so we're okay with 4. Okay. So, Hula, sorry for that. Let me invite you to make your opening remarks.
Sorry? I know. Where are you going? Sorry, thank you very much, Chair. And you're quite right. I'm delighted to be here on what I assume will be the first of many, many engagements with the committee. As you know, I took up appointment on the 2nd of March of this year. a part of a 4-year appointment, so I'm very, very pleased to be here. And again, just for the record, I would be very happy to talk about other issues that are on the agenda over the next month, not least HGFS, but also public sector reform and the possible review of the NICI legislation. I want to introduce my colleague, Alison Montgomery, who is our Senior Policy and Research Officer, and extend apologies from our Chief Executive, Mairead McCafferty, who had other business to attend to. I'm not going to go at length about what the Commissioner does, and I will probably speak in the third person, although we're talking about me. But you know that in 2003, the Commissioner for Children legislation was established to safeguard and promote the rights and best interests of all children and young people in Northern Ireland, and mainly up until the age of 18, and in some cases to the age of 21. And I am required under the legislation to review the adequacy and effectiveness of law, practice and services, and it's within that bit of the legislation that I'm here giving you evidence today. So firstly, just to talk about the bill that you're considering, I want to put on record how much I warmly, more than warmly, hotly welcome this bill, and I do genuinely believe it will give it will secure greater and more effective services for our children and young people. So I want to congratulate Stephen Agnew on bringing this bill forward, and the committee and OFMDFM for the amount of work they're putting into to make sure it's the right bill for us. The bill reflects the fact that the lives of children and young people do not neatly fit into the departmental remits, and attempts to alleviate that situation. I'm just going to very quickly give some of the highlights that I think need further consideration. I'm not going to go on and on about the need for effective collaboration across government departments, particularly at a time when we have scarce resources. There are many, many examples, and Anne will give you more after this session, of where more effective joined-up working between government departments is necessary. We have been at this for many, many years, and not having a duty has thwarted the full realisation of children's rights and the full realisation of effective services. In 2011, NICI published a report called Barriers to Effective Government Delivery for the Government Delivery for Children in Northern Ireland, and you referred to that. We've sent you an extract of that already. And it was based on the work undertaken by Professor Lundy and Dr Byrne at Queen's into what hinders government in delivering fully for its children. And the report made a series of recommendations, but one of the most crucial ones was the need for a statutory duty to cooperate at both central government and intra-agency level. The report concluded by saying the silo mentality that exists amongst individual government departments is thought to sometimes impinge upon the outworking of strategies, policies and action plans on cross-cutting issues impacting on children's lives. Again, if further evidence were needed that children's lives do not fit into Department of Education, Department of Health, the RD, any of our government departments. NICI has a plethora of research, including the Walking and Talking Participation Report, which my predecessor Patricia Loosley-Mooney published last year, which again said that there was a lack of government coordination with regards to engaging with children and young people. But much, much more worrying, in 2012, NICI published another report called Still Vulnerable, which was undertaken by the social work team at Queen's, who said, when they examined the stories of children and young people who had died as a result of suicide, they found clear evidence at the lack of coordination between the various services that were engaged in those children's lives. I could almost stop now and say, do we need any more to tell us why this bill is crucial? Next month, we will publish another piece of work, hopefully, subject to everyone meeting their timetable, which will give clear examples and hopefully publish a template with regards to how we can effectively work across our government departments. And I'm hoping that you can consider that in your deliberations around the details of this bill. So just very quickly on the various clauses. Clause 1, the general duty. I have already said how important it is that we have a duty a statutory duty on government departments to cooperate for the design and delivery of services for children and young people. A clear obligation on departments and their agencies will provide an effective means of achieving cross-departmental working, which ultimately should contribute to improving outcomes for our children. I'm also very, very pleased to see that within Clause 1, it specifies the 6 high-level outcomes of the children's strategy. And I think it's crucial that within the bill, we have the children's strategy as the framework for children and young people. And everything else around children and young people needs to flow directly from the children's strategy. Clause 2 talks about the cooperation report. And I understand there's been some concern that this may add to the bureaucracy of government doing their work. I don't see why it should. And indeed, the drafter of this legislation has proposed a 3-year reporting cycle. We would propose a 1-year reporting cycle, and that should be part of normal government reporting on how it's delivering for its children and young people, primarily through the strategy. But it's also required to provide an annual report under the Child Poverty Act on the state of child poverty in Northern Ireland. So it shouldn't be overly onerous. And if we have a good and effective template, it should be incorporated quite naturally into the outworkings of this bill. I would also suggest that Nikki has a role to play in how it scrutinises government on its delivery for its children. And I think that consideration needs to be given as to how we can execute our scrutiny role and provide some independent verification that government is properly cooperating and properly delivering on outcomes for children and young people. I love reading progress reports from various agencies. Often they're too much about process and they're not enough about impact and outcome. And I think if we had a proper reporting mechanism with a good independent assessment and scrutiny element to it, we can focus people's mind on actually achieving real change for our children and young people. Clause 3 talks about shared and pooled funds. And we've had lengthy discussions within, across the team I work with, about whether we should insist on this. But the possibility of pooling funds is an excellent idea. And again, within reducing resources will provide for more efficient and effective services, and ultimately to the realisation of a more child-focused, holistic approach supporting the achievement of outcomes for our children and young people. Finally, Clause 4 talks about children's services planning, and I'm not going to try and steal Anne Godfrey's thunder because she can talk far more expertly than I on this issue. However, just for the record, I was involved with Anne and others in children's services planning, the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, since 1999. And the proposals in this bill, in my view, simply strengthen the arrangements currently in place by giving legislative effect to the work of the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership. Many of the agencies involved in the partnership are listed under Clause 4 of the bill, and we would suggest it's important to ensure that all the relevant bodies are there. Clause 4 also includes a statement, an obligation that the Children and Young People's Plan should be kept under review and published at intervals of not more than 3 years. Again, I would reiterate my earlier comments, which is that should be on an annual basis. Finally, there's a couple of other things I'd like to say that we would like to see in the bill. One is around how children and young people are engaged with in this process. It's great, it's absolutely right that our agencies, but surely another key partner in the delivery and design of services for our children and young people, for children and young people, is children and young people themselves and their families. So I would make a bold suggestion around including children and young people as a named partner in subclause 1. So in concluding, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child have emphasised that effective implementation of the UNCRC requires visible coordination to realise the rights across all government departments. By introducing this bill, we are taking a step forward in implementing the mechanisms required to protect the rights of our children and young people. So I would reiterate Nikki's support for the Children's Services Cooperation Bill and welcome the unique opportunity it offers to plan, deliver and monitor effective joined-up services and provisions for our children. which will promote their rights and help the Northern Ireland Assembly and its executive fulfil its obligations under the UNCRC. So that's the formal bit. I'm happy to take any questions, and Alison will help.
Okay, good. Thank you very much indeed. I wanted to ask you about whether you could give us some examples of how the bill, where it currently in law, might have helped. But I'm very conscious in your opening remarks, you talked about suicides with a direct causal link to the lack of cross-departmental work. So I'm not asking for one of those, but is there perhaps a less dramatic example of how the bill could have helped up to now?
I think on a very general level, it obviously focuses on the whole child, and the Commissioner has referred to the fact that children cannot divide their needs across departments as we currently have them. So it would allow a more holistic approach to be taken when dealing with children, and a more integrated approach. One of the issues that we would have raised in another one of our reports is around transitions for young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And that's an area we've been very concerned about, where there isn't the most effective joining up of health and education in terms of the preparation of transition plans and preparing young people for moving on to the adult stage of life. So that would be another concrete example I can give where there isn't, a holistic approach being taken and a coherent approach in terms of how young people are dealt with. There's also issues around, I think, the levels of collaboration that we've seen to date. In some cases it does happen, but it's through the goodwill of departments, or the goodwill of individuals, effective relationships being in place. But we really feel at times that's not enough, and the evidence again, through research and through other organisations' reports, have indicated that it's not enough just to rely on goodwill. It really needs to be in place. There would also be a better sharing of information across different departments and agencies. At times we find that information hasn't been passed on, and certainly within our legal and investigation services sometimes we find that information hasn't been passed, say from an education and library board across to health, or vice versa. So again, we would have evidence in that regard.
And the thinking that you were referring to there about interdepartmental working, it's not static, and it's not just us, and there's always emerging thinking, there's always new thinking. What is the very latest?
On the need to cooperate?
Yes, and the best way to do it.
I think the best way to do it is, if we have a children and young people strategy, which is a strategy of our executive, it then becomes the responsibility of whether we're 9 or 12 or however many ministers sit around that table to ensure it delivers on each and every one of those outcomes. Now, so being healthy or enjoy education, Alison's already talked about, education, achieving education. A child cannot do well at school if they're living in poverty, if they have poor health. You don't need me to tell you all that. So it cannot just be the responsibility of the Minister of Education and his department to ensure a child achieves at school. It has to be the responsibility of our whole government. And too often, particularly with a department like education, it's silos. All I have to worry about is between 9 and 3. I just have to worry about them. But actually, we know that's not true. From breakfast to when they go to bed and beyond, we have to make sure our children are safe and well, and we haven't done it. We haven't done it, the children's services planning process that came out of the Children Order was an attempt to do that, and with all the goodwill in the world, sat around several of those tables in the last 16 years, and people felt hamstrung because they didn't have this obligation, this duty. Government departments and agencies are very good at keeping an eye to their legislation and to what statute requires them to do, and this is a way of making sure they play nicely.
I think everybody gets the fact that most governments are
Yes.
vertical, it's silos, and effective government is actually more horizontal, cutting across them. So I think everybody really backs the intent of what is going on here. It's just the best way to actually make it happen. And personally, I would agree with you very much that we can become almost obsessive with the inputs of government, the process of government, without a proper focus on actually, are we making an impact? Have we got an outcome here that makes people better off? But in terms of process, Kula. You're saying that the three-yearly reports, no, you'd rather have annual, and you don't see that as being particularly onerous. And that was one of our concerns about how onerous the reporting process was. But when was the last time the child poverty report, the annual child poverty report, was laid in a timely manner?
I don't think it has been. I think we haven't had an annual action plan on our children's strategy since 2011.
So why rely on a system that isn't working?
Why? Well, no, I'm not relying on the system. I'm trying to fix the system. I'm trying to make a suggestion about fixing the system. If we get more streamlined, which I think this bill is trying to make us do, and that we're not all working to different strategies, if we're working to the one strategy, and then everything coming out of that is part of that one process. If we've got one holistic process, then it should be easier. But I don't know about you, but I don't want to wait for 3 years to see how it's going on the lives of children and young people. If we get into that way of reporting, if we gather our data and evaluate our services in a timely and on an ongoing basis, rather than let's run around at the end and count our widgets, then we will know how we're doing. 3 years is too long to work out where we're going wrong and to get it right. That's not to say, and change takes a long time, and you're not going to see it in the first year. But if you've identified the milestones along the road, you can start saying, well, we're getting there, we're achieving them. And that's what good outcomes monitoring and impact evaluation tells us we should do. We should know where the end goal is, but be able to identify the milestones along that road and tick them off. And 3 years is too long to wait in the life of a child.
Is there a danger that in bringing on another annual report, that actually you only serve to further delay the child poverty report, which, as you say, has never been laid in a time?
It should be part of the report. It shouldn't be a separate report. You know, I'm not looking for another report. In every report, there should be a section, and we will be hopefully bringing forward suggestions around templates and what that will look like. But in every report, there should be a section about how government is cooperating to achieve a reduction or eradication of child poverty.
But the child poverty report, as I understand it, is an obligation that comes out of Westminster legislation.
Yes, it does.
So but you are proposing that report is amended.
And I'm not even for a minute suggesting we all go off to Westminster and try and change that. But the Child Poverty Action Plan will be although it's part of the Child Poverty Act, the 2010 Act, it will also be one of the mechanisms by which we're delivering on our children's strategy. What I'm saying is if we produce an annual report on progress of our children's strategy, which we're going to get a new one hopefully next year, then we will include within that progress, we will put in that progress on our child poverty report, and we're then free, OFMDFM or whichever government department it is, will be free to add whatever sections they want, because it will be part of reporting on the children's strategy. And in that is where I'm suggesting that they should incorporate the cooperation. And also in the children and young people's plan coming out of the strategic partnership, there should be a clear section on how they're cooperating to deliver for its children and young people. I'm not going to start tinkering with Westminster legislation.
I don't want to get hung up on the process. Last thing I want to do, actually, but I do question whether you can. I still think you need to table the discrete child poverty report.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Okay.
Yes, you do.
What about independent input to this? Do you favour it?
I do favour it. I think I think independent scrutiny is what we're looking for. I think as somebody who's not long out of the voluntary and community sector, we were required, and that sector is constantly required to provide independent evaluations of delivery of its services. And so there's what we're seeing in Scotland is that there's key engagement with both service users and other organisations to provide some independence to an evaluation. Because, if we're going to say we did a good job, it's much better if somebody independent says we did a good job rather than me saying I did a good job, because I'm always going to say I did a good job. I need somebody else to tell me and give me clear advice and steer me in the right direction when I'm not doing a good job. And I'm not sure why our government would be any different. And that's where I think there is a role for me and my office. We are there. It wouldn't be any more expensive because we already get that we have a role in providing that independent scrutiny. Because our only focus, my only concern around all this is the impact and the delivery for children and young people and their rights. So that I think there has to be independent scrutiny or an independent role in monitoring our government. And alongside this committee, of course. I wouldn't want to negate the role of the Assembly.
Supplementary Chair. Should that be in terms of consulting stakeholders in the preparation of the report, or another mechanism outside of that in responding to the report?
I think there needs to, well, I don't think responding into the report is always a helpful process.
So like a statutory duty to consult relevant stakeholders in the preparation of the report?
In the preparation, and I think there needs to be an element of independence, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks.
No problem. Megan.
Thanks. So sorry I had to step out at the...
That's okay.
In terms of Clause 1, you've made reference to the high-level outcomes from the strategy. They're vague. I mean, they're designed for a strategy, not a piece of legislation, and they're vague, and it's just a worry that they could be misinterpreted or interpreted in the way that people want to interpret them. I'm thinking in terms of reporting there as well. So do we need to tighten up on them, or, I mean, they'd be hard to measure because they are so vague.
I think I know what you're saying, because if it's not put in within the context of the children's strategy, so, and I know the Chair mentioned that you'd had discussions with the department around some of their suggestions as to how they could strengthen this bill, and I know there's been some conversations around this particular section. For me, what I would want to see is an obligation to cooperate around our children's strategy. And these are, you wouldn't know it to read this, these are the 6 high-level outcomes from our children's strategy. So I think it takes, it takes the very, very clever people in the drafting department of the Assembly to come up with a way of saying that what we're asking you to do is to cooperate to deliver on our children's strategy, and these are currently the 6 high-level outcomes. So whether you have a clause, regulations that specify the high-level outcomes, or whether you enshrine it in legislation and then review the bill every 10 years when we have a new strategy, I don't know. But I would like to see the children and young people strategy named so that people are clear that we're trying to achieve these outcomes. They are aspirational, high-level outcomes are, but the challenge is from year 1 to year 10, did we get closer to this? And that's the challenge. And it is a little bit motherhood and apple pie, but that's, we need to strive for the best. But I think you're right, it needs to be tightened to be clear that it's about the strategy and that we've got a whole bunch of actions and indicators around making that happen.
And then I suppose in terms of Clause 3, there's the enabling power that allows departments to pool and share resources. But would you prefer to see it compel departments? Could it be strengthened?
Again, as I said, I think we had quite a lengthy discussions. I think I would, my experience of government departments, if you don't make them do it, they won't do it. I just think that this is something that should be kept under review at the moment. I would prefer probably to see them compelled, but I think we're in a process, and I think I'd like to see if they would come to this one willingly. I think where I'm at with that. It's your mum wanting to know what the tea is.
And well, just finally then, the extra clause that you said you'd like to see about the inclusion of young people, and obviously there isn't really meaningful participation of young people in consultation of strategies involving them, so it would be good, but what would that look like? What would you envisage for...
I think government department, and let's not forget, it's not just that because we have an obligation under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, we also have Section 75, and you had in your previous evidence session discussion around Section 75 and equality impact assessments, and Section 75 recognises children and young people as a group who have to be consulted with. And I think if we make it meaningfully, and that is another role Nikki and others can have around making sure that that's meaningful consultation, and it's not, it's gathering that body of evidence of what children and young people think and what their parents and carers think as well, and taking that forward, and clear evidence in all reports and decision making, how they heard the views of children and young people and how they took them into account. That doesn't mean they have to do what the young people said they had to do, but it's evidence that they took them into account and with a good reason as to why they're doing it or why they're not.
And ultimately seeing how the outcomes have actually impacted on children and young people, actually hearing from them, you know, the target group, the end users, as it were, that they actually have felt some impact from, you know, the joined up working that should now be taking place.
Okay. Alex Maskey.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Coolan and Alison, for their presentation so far. A couple of things. I mean, we already touched on the issue around the, I think you referred early on by possibly production of a template as to how some of these things are measured, because certainly for me, I think that the difficulty is that in the mindset that you're outlining here would be my own and probably most others, that you kind of try and work through a process and continually try to change that. But legislation doesn't work like that. So you have a bill, you'll have a bill, the provisions of a bill, and that'll be it. Work your way through that and you'll measure whatever you're going to do against that. So it's not a moving feast. And obviously you might want to at some point review that, see the progress, because otherwise, as you say, from year 1 to year 10, you can't really measure the legislation from year 1 to year 10 because you're just ticking the same boxes, and even if they're very important ones to do. So I'm just kind of conscious about that process, because the bill doesn't necessarily give you that opportunity to measure over a 10-year period. So I'm wondering how we might actually develop some types of measurements or template or benchmarking so we can do that. Second point, and this is what I grapple with, because we've all agreed that this inherently is a good thing, but I struggle a wee bit with, in a way, trying to get government to join up in the way in which we all want it to do, but in a way you're leaving that the responsibility of essentially a non-departmental public body. So not a ministerial accountability, it's not a departmental responsibility. So I struggle with that a wee bit, because you're kind of trying to give more power to, as I say, in this case, the Health Care Board, but it's still an NDPB, with all due respect, if you know what I mean. So I just struggle with that a wee bit, the concept of giving more power to a body which isn't an authoritative body itself.
Could I come back to you just on your first
please,
point, Mr. Maskey? One of the issues that we're looking at in our commissioned research is looking at how other jurisdictions are rolling out joined up working across government, and as you know, there is a requirement in England, Wales and Scotland to do that. We're also looking at Australia and some international examples. But one of the issues we have been looking at is how reports are prepared and what is the good practice around reporting. So as I say, or as the Commissioner has mentioned, we're still just waiting on the final report coming in, but some of the initial findings have been very interesting in terms of how we might go about developing a pro forma or developing some kind of template. And one of the suggestions indeed coming from local stakeholders has been that there would be guidance issued with the bill as to what that would look like, and so that people are very clear about what is required, and that you're able to compare across departments or across agencies how they're actually completing those reports. So there are some key requirements around that. A common language is one of the issues that will be important across departments. About a shared recognition within that of where collaboration is working. Explicitly in reports talking about how actions and activities are linked to outcomes, clearly saying what this action is seeking to achieve, and also demonstrating how outcomes are measured as another issue. Good information systems and how information is shared in terms of supporting people to complete reports, and actually looking at over time how there has been an impact. So one of the key things that the Commissioner had mentioned and we have said is how reporting takes place. So it's not just the delivery of joined up working, how was it gone about, how was it actually achieved. And I think maybe picking up on your previous point, Megan, around pulling of resources, this will be an important way to demonstrate how resources were pulled. How did that work? Did it actually work in practice? And if it wasn't being done, did that then impact on an outcome being achieved? So I think the reporting is absolutely key, and how it is actually undertaken is really key as well, and that there is, as I say, some kind of consensus across departments about how it's actually achieved.
And on the Health and Social Care Board issue, I understand what you're saying, but if you look at what the Children's Services Planning and the Children and People Strategic, everything they've produced, it's been a direct it's complemented the strategy for children. It's worked to the 6 high-level outcomes. So I think you can tighten that up within this. And let's not forget, they are a department of the health they are an agency of the Health Committee. So I'm sure the Minister, if he feels they're acting out of line, will do what they need to do.
Okay. Thank you.
Take me back, could you please, to this kind of committee you're talking about in terms of oversight. Tell me again how you see that. So you want an annual report
on our children and young people, on our strategy for children and young people, yes I do. And within that annual report, I would like to see an element, the cooperation. I would like to see discussion about how they're cooperating together and how that's impacting on a higher quality of service for our children.
And that will be written up by the Health and Social Care Board?
No, this is on the children's strategy.
So
but the Children and Young People's Plan coming underneath will be something underneath that. The Health and Social Care Board plan that's discussed in Clause 4, and Anne will take you through, like I said, more expertly than I. The Children and Young People's Plan specifically is for children in need. It's for a particular distinct group of children as identified in the children order, and that should report in using the similar templates that Alison has described. So it's almost a sub-plan of the children and young people strategy. So it should all be part of that mechanism. You know, we should have a streamlined process that does that.
Chair, very quick supplementary. There's an added challenge there in that it appears that responsibility for children and young people is transferring to the Department of Education. So, maybe not right now in this context, but
I'll be back to talk to you about that.
Hear how an overarching executive strategy lies with the Department for Education, or doesn't. Just to flag it as an issue, but
think
maybe
it is
not
an
for
issue.
today.
Put us back, I think, with us towards the end of May.
I think it has relevance to this issue as a side issue.
Yes.
So, yeah, okay. But then you want another independent committee?
No, I don't.
So what's the independent element beyond yourself that you're looking for?
I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm saying there should be an independent element.
But you
I
are.
would suggest that's us. One of the challenges of the NICI legislation, and I hope to be back before you to talk about that as well, is that we are not formally structured into some of these processes in the best way we should be. So whilst I am obliged, as I said, to give advice around how our government is meeting its obligations to its children, I'm not knitted in to some of those processes, and nor is government obliged to respond to my advice. And that's really one of this is such an important report, you know, our report on our children's strategy, that I think it provides an opportunity to knit your independent mechanism. I am your mechanism. I am your key advisor, for what, you know, without being grandiose.
Sure. And it would not be unique amongst commissioners who have been set up under the devolved administration that the ministers do not have to take your advice on board.
I'm not suggesting...
They have to listen to your advice, but they don't have to react positively to your advice. But what you do have, I'm just looking at the 2003 order.
Oh, good.
The Commissioner, you shall keep under review the adequacy and effectiveness of law and practice relating to the rights and welfare of children and young persons.
That's right.
Which is core business to this, because this is law. And also keep under review the adequacy and effectiveness of services provided for children and young persons by the relevant authorities, which the bill touches. So this is your core work.
It is. It is. But what it doesn't, what the Act doesn't say is that government has to tell me what they're going to do with my advice. You know, it's got one half of the, in that respect, there's a number of other things that I have challenges with, but it has the one half. We need the other half as well. Of course, I wouldn't...
Just define for me what you think the other half is.
Is that I'm not for 1 minute suggesting, although in the world I live in, I think everyone should take my advice, but I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that government, just because I said, government will say, OK, Commissioner, you said, so let's do. What I think, though, if I give government advice, if NICI gives government advice, government should come back and say, in the same way I talked about children and young people, government should come back and say, we heard your advice, and this is what we're going to do with it. We're going to ignore it for these reasons, or we're going to accept it. That's all I'm suggesting. I'm not for a minute obliging government to take my advice, because they have other considerations.
But that second half is not something you legislate for.
No.
That second half is actually down to your ability to make a persuasive evidence-based argument to government.
Okay. Well, I think we will. I think we can tease that out a little bit when we discuss HGFS about how we're doing on that.
And I do think that the government absolutely should come back to you
I agree.
with any evidence and say, this is what we think, whether it's we're shredding it or we're implementing it in full or that full spectrum in between. Absolutely. Why would we set up a commission?
And I think I am determined to make, to try and make it a two-way conversation.
If you feel at times you have been ignored from a previous life, let me tell you, you are not alone. Members, are we? Alex, have you?
What's your name again?
So we move on just to the GFS, if we may.
Okay. I mean, I think, as you saw, I came in to hear the minister's evidence to you, and I welcome very much what Minister McCann said about some of the frustrations of power sharing. For the record, I think there was some discussion about whether Nikki was mildly disappointed or disappointed. Can I say I am deeply and utterly disappointed, outraged, and any other emotive language you wish to choose about how disappointed I am that the majority of our children and young people are being ignored in this. Minister Bell talked about how if we're going to get this legislation through an accelerated passage, then we have to do we have to go with over 16 because of the complications of including children and young people and the exceptions required. I don't think I accept that argument, because all the advice was given to the ministers by Nikki and the Equality Commission using Robin Allen's legal opinion as to how some of the challenges of the protective legislation we have around could be overcome. All that advice was given back in June 2013. They've had plenty of time to construct a proper piece of legislation that takes into account the need to protect our children and young people. The only other thing I would want to say, and I'm happy to take some questions on this, is that I have yet to speak to a parent or a grandparent who doesn't think this is a good idea. I think a lot of you have said that nobody has said. We know, and talk to any advice service for children and young people, including our own advice service, and the biggest protectors of children's rights are generally, not always, but generally their parents and carers. And they are just as furious as me if you ask them as a parent what they think, and grandparent, what they think about the proposal to exclude our young people. I don't for a minute doubt that our older people, and I know our older people need these protections, and it is ridiculous that we don't have legislation that protects everyone on the basis of age. We have less examples, and it is fair to say there's less age discrimination against our children and young people, but there is age discrimination against our children and young people. And again, Minister Bell talked about creating a culture where we do not find it acceptable to discriminate against people on the basis of age. I think by introducing this legislation in its current format, we are creating a culture that says it's okay to discriminate against our children and young people. And I am very, very worried about what message that sends to our children particularly, but to everybody else as well. So just off the top of my head, that's and in direct response to the evidence I heard earlier, we will, of course, I'm happy to take further questions, and we will, of course, be back before you once the consultation is out.
Have you decided what you're going to do? Given you have options, and you can say we've lost that battle, let the legislation go through. You can take Jennifer McCann's view that this is a staging post. You could look at the opportunity that may lie within consultation and the equality impact assessment.
I think, and I will take the ministers at their word, that this is a genuine consultation, and we will do everything we can to ensure that this consultation, that the voice is loud and proud that children and young people have to be included. I am mindful of the question you asked about the equality impact assessment. I'm challenged to see how proper EQIA will find anything other than saying mitigation is you have to include kids. I don't know how else, but I'm not an EQIA expert, but I am challenged to see how the response would be anything other. But if we take the ministers at their word that this is a genuine consultation, and if we hear what members said, that everyone they have spoken to, including the older people sector, have been very clear that it should be an all-age discrimination. So it's my intention to engage with the consultation, to continue to engage with other organisations in the children's sector and in the older people's sector, to engage directly with children and young people and their parents and anybody else who wants to talk to me, and to ensure that our government meets its obligation by having an all-age GFS.
We'll take one more from Alex.
Thank you, Chair. No, I mean, I won't rehearse what I said earlier on. People take notice of it at least, but I certainly do encourage people to respond to the consultation. I take assurance from both ministers who said that the consultation will be serious, genuine enterprise, and I look forward to that, because I personally have no doubt in my mind that the vast majority of people will want to see legislation which includes everybody in anti-discrimination legislation. I find the rationale, as it has been attempted to be put out by some people, is completely irrational. I think it's a throwback, but that's my opinion. So thank you.
Can I just say, and I think Mr Little's point was well made and just been reiterated by Mr Maskey, I have yet to hear a reason as to why children should be excluded from this legislation, and the fact that they do it across the water and over the border doesn't seem to me to be a good enough reason. Just because they do it doesn't mean we have to. A good enough reason why we should. So that is the question I will be asking come May right through to July, is why are you excluding? There's no evidence. I've seen no evidence.
And you say we will pick it up. Please Zuma, thank you very much. Alison Montgomery, thank you very much. Members, we have one final session now on the bill. Anne Godfrey is a retired professional advisor with regard to children's services planning. There's a brief from the clerk at page 138, and a written submission from Ms Godfrey begins at page 140 with a summary paper at 152 in your packs. So, you're very welcome. We appreciate the effort you put into taking a look at this bill and giving us your thoughts based on your experience and evidence. Would you care to open with a few thoughts that might direct us in our questioning?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I, similarly to the Commissioner, very much support the fact that this bill would require cooperation to achieve agreed outcomes. The experience that I've had, and I did start in this work in 1998, the experience that I've had covers the period before we had agreed outcomes to work to and afterwards. And as the Commissioner had explained, the Children's Services Planning process, which I worked within, when the Children's Strategy came into place, with the agreed outcomes in place, the Children's Services Planning process changed what it had previously been doing, and we changed all of our work so that instead of looking at services, how services were operating, we looked at how the outcomes were being achieved. And that process itself has taken, a good number of years. But in relation to the 6 high-level outcomes in the children's strategy, I suppose one thing I'm very aware of is that strategy itself, I think, was consulted on for about 5 years. And there was a lot of input from children and young people in particular. And there was a lot of discussion about, Mr Maskey, particularly what you were saying about, well, how can these outcomes be actually measured? There was a lot of discussion about that. And what that led to was, the extensive set of indicators that are now in place for the measurement of the children's strategy. And within the children's services planning process at agency level where I worked, we used the same indicators. So as has been said by Ms. Fearon, these outcomes seem very generalistic. But in fact, when you break them down and you say, well, how are we going to measure that outcome, say, children achieving educationally? Well, obviously, there are the obvious things like educational outcomes. How many A levels and GCSEs are children getting? But also there are other outcomes. How are children going into school in the first place? And those are indicators then added up, add to the outcomes. And I think that goes to another of the questions that you've just been debating, which is, how do you have a reporting mechanism that I would agree should be annually? How do you have a reporting mechanism that doesn't just become a report on process? And I suppose my view would be that that reporting mechanism should be first and foremost, how are the indicators progressing? And it will be clear from the work that's already been, in the reports, whose responsibility is it at agency level and at departmental level, whose responsibility is it to increase those indicators? So that if a report, an annual report that was required, was structured around how are the indicators progressing, it doesn't become too onerous. You could look at the Children and Young People Strategic Partnerships plans that are online. They report annually. They are based on the indicators. There's a lot of work that's been going on for years and years now about measuring those indicators and being able to track those. Some of that has been a lot of work. Some of that work has been about encouraging agencies to share their information into the pot so that it can be used. So I suppose I'm very much in favour of the link between the outcomes and this bill as a whole. And as the Commissioner has said, of course, the outcomes come from the children's strategy. So I'm very much in favour of that link with the children's strategy. As has been said, the duty to collaborate is essential because it's core business. It makes the collaboration core business for every agency. And as we know, anything that's a statutory duty for a statutory department of government or a statutory agency is something that will get a lot of attention. I've sat around tables for years and years and years and years, encouraging and helping people from different agencies to talk about how can we improve these outcomes for children. And there is a great deal of goodwill, both at chief executive level of the agencies and at the officer level. There's a great deal of goodwill. Where it falls down is when it gets into those discussions that go on in agencies about, well, what are we going to prioritise? Are we going to prioritise this, or are we going to prioritise those things that are in our core business? And that's where it falls down. So that's my view on the importance of outcomes. I have made a couple of suggestions in relation to amendments to the bill, and I know that there was a bit of discussion about the bill not being clear enough. And my view is that as the bill already requires cooperation at 2 levels, that should be clearly stated within the bill. Firstly, in relation to I would suggest that there should be a change to the title paragraph so that to add in, as well as the statutory duty to collaborate at departmental level, but to add in, require agencies to discharge their functions and cooperate with each other in order to contribute to the achievement of the same outcomes through amendment to the Children Order. So it's basically, that is there already, it's just making it clearer. And then that there should be a title saying a general duty at departmental level and a corresponding duty at agency level coming through an amendment to the Children Order. So the other amendment that I would suggest is in relation to the Schedule 2 of the Children Order. Currently, the Schedule 2 of the Children Order and Part 4 of the Children Order relates to children in need, and those are children who require services, particularly from health and social care and education, and because they won't achieve their outcomes unless they have further services. The problem with that wording is that it doesn't allow collaboration on early intervention. And I don't need to go. I know that this committee and many committees have looked at the value of early intervention in the last few years, and I know that that case has been won. In terms of practice on the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, the practice has been to focus on early intervention and to encourage agencies to collaborate for early intervention. And I know that there has been, some very good practice at departmental level on particular projects. So my suggestion would be that to change the wording, and I've given the wording in through my written response, but to change the wording, instead of looking at children in need, but to look at the high-level outcomes to ensure that the work at agency level is looking at improvement in those outcomes of children rather than looking at particular groups of children. In terms of children's services planning, I think the Commissioner has said really a lot of what I would have been saying, and I'm quite happy to answer questions about the detail of children's services planning. In relation to the involvement of children at the agency level of children's services planning, I have suggested in my amendments that, in terms of the agencies that need to be involved, the list of statutory agencies, and also that the community and voluntary sector should be involved, I've suggested that there also should be a requirement that children and young people should be involved in the planning process, not just consulted on it, but involved in it, as well as looking at it afterwards, but involved in it, and there should be a requirement on the planning process to do that. And I do have personal experience of how that's worked at the agency level over the years. The transition of disabled children and young people to adulthood has been mentioned, and that's been a huge issue in relation to the lack of collaboration, particularly between health and education. Now there's the working group of the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership on young disabled people transitioning to adulthood. Its workload has been determined. Its 3-year plan has been determined by disabled children and young people's view on what would make a difference for them in relation to transition to adulthood, and it's very different from what would have come up from agencies, and it's coming from them. So it can be done. That's what I'm saying. It can be done. My final thought is on sharing resources and pooling resources. My view on this is that it's essential. Even with a duty to collaborate, that gets you so far. But at the end of the day, what makes a difference is what agencies do with their money. And experiences in GB have been, and other parts of the world where you have outcomes-based planning in this way, is that you need to have pooled resources as well. So that the step that actually makes a difference in terms of services on the ground is what you do with your money. And once it's possible to pool your resources, and there are different ways of doing that, then those people who are sitting around a table thinking about, well, what are we going to do to make a change to this particular aspect of children's lives, can think about their resources together rather than separately, so that you don't get to a point of, okay, we all agree with that in theory, and now we have to go back to our boards of our agencies and to persuade our chief executive to, give a little bit of money to this collaborative effort, which doesn't work. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Now, you did say that the introduction of the strategy changed thinking and put focus onto outcomes.
Yes.
So why could what this bill is intending to achieve not be achieved in the next iteration of a strategy?
Well, because the strategy has been in place since 2005, and the children's services planning process It started in 1998 and is still in process. So the experience after the children's strategy came into place was that it was really helpful in the sense that it put in place the outcomes so that everyone could then look at the outcomes. But without the statutory duty to collaborate, however much goodwill there is, and there is a lot of goodwill, I'm really aware of the fact that there's a lot of goodwill at different levels in agencies, but however much of goodwill there is, it's limited by the fact that each agency in each department doesn't have a duty to collaborate to deliver those outcomes, so that it puts it below in the pecking order of things that are important, below everything that's within each department or agency's requirements.
So the strategy was good, but on the other hand, this is better.
No, the strategy is excellent, and what the strategy requires to be put into place is the statutory duty to collaborate. So it needs this to be enabled to succeed.
Are there any examples of where pooling resources has worked interdepartmentally here or elsewhere?
Well, I think there are quite a lot of examples elsewhere. I think here, now this has happened since I've retired, but I know that there's been a major early intervention project that has involved the pooling of resources across different departments, and I know that the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership has been involved in that at agency level, and I know that that has been very, very helpful. You know, I mean, there have been other examples, but there are a few. I mean, I know one that I was involved in was early intervention for the prevention of offending, which into which there was funding from DOJ, and DHS SPS funding went into that process, and that has involved very, very successful projects across Northern Ireland to prevent young people getting involved in offending. But they are few and far between, the examples, without this statutory duty to collaborate.
In terms of timing, does this only work, or does it only work to best effect if you do it at the beginning of a comprehensive spending review or at the design stage of a programme for government? Personally,
I think it should be just done as soon as possible. Because I think whether or not it fits with the timing of the comprehensive spending review, if the statutory duty to collaborate is enacted, and obviously then guidance has to come. Statutory guidance has to come.
Well, if it's enacted at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, where does the budget come from?
The budget isn't there, but what happens tomorrow morning is that those people with responsibility for deciding what happens, ministers within departments, chief executives within agencies, will then think, this is one of my department or my agencies. This is a part of our core business. So I will be thinking about this in a different way.
Yeah, but I don't have a budget to pool.
No, but there are, of course, the departments have their existing budgets, the agencies have their existing budgets. So,
but they don't have spare cash now.
No, they don't have spare cash. I remember when the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership was set up in 2012. And that brought together the chief executives of all of the relevant agencies, like Health and Social Care Board, Education Library Boards, etc. And it was very, very interesting that at that first meeting, the chief executives welcomed, the partnership. And they also, because it was 2012, so they also said, we are in the position of having less in the budgets, which is why it's really important that we collaborate with other agencies, because we have less money rather than more money. So it's about collaborating better with existing resources. It's not about new resources.
Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anne, for your presentation so far. I mean, just taken from your own kind of profile, your own bio, I mean, obviously you're an expert practitioner in this particular field, so your views are very important. If I heard you right early on, I thought you were kind of describing almost like in terms of measuring outcomes, like a matrix almost, which would total up each component might have X number of points. I'm only just paraphrasing this, of course, but And then you might tick it off out of 100 marks, you know, they've all done well or haven't. I'm just trying to work out, given your expertise, how ambitious can we really be with all of this? Because it's like everything else, and I'm not offering this as a reason for not doing it, because as I said in the last session, I think we've all agreed that inherently this would be a good thing. What we're trying to work out now is the nuts and bolts, really, how to make it the best thing. But I'm just kind of conscious that, and I've heard you also saying, I mean, there is an awful lot of goodwill out there among a whole range of people. I mean, I know school teachers and principals and other different public servants who see things and then they go and try and join up with that themselves. I've also seen examples of within the criminal justice system where police at times thinking they can work with young people to prevent reoffending and so on. But ultimately, you still, I mean, I was at a wake area the other night where a young fella took his own life for all of them and left the family, as what happens. A lot of good work done, a lot have been in prison, a lot of good work done, and people would have thought up until a while ago that there's a fairly reasonable job done by a young fella, but problems re-emerged again and you had the worst case scenario, and I don't want to deal with all that, but I'm saying to myself, well, you would have measured that case 6 months ago as relatively successful, if you know what I mean, but unfortunately it wouldn't be. So again, I'm stressing on that, making that as an argument not to do what we're discussing here. So I'm just trying to work out how ambitious in your experience can we be, or is it just the thing to do to get this the legislation enacted so that there is a part of cooperate or an obligation to cooperate, and that in itself will be a good thing. I mean, what's just your view on that?
I think it is a good thing in itself because of what you've said about the young man who took his life. Every report, we've seen them all, you know, every report about young people, children dying comes out with but whatever else is in there, there's the agencies didn't collaborate. It's been going on for 30 years. So it's critical, this is critical, to allowing proper collaboration at a senior level in agencies, because a lot of what goes on, which is really, really good, is at practitioner level. You know, the social worker and the teacher and the community voluntary sector members in a group and the teacher. You know, those people usually collaborate pretty well. Yeah. Or if they can, they want to. When they go back into their agencies fail to allow them, you know, fail to give them the time, give them the support, you know, give them the finances to do sometimes really small things that would really make a difference. So I think it's absolutely critical. I think we can be ambitious because I think the measurement is a gradual process. And I remember this again. It reminds me of the discussions that were held during the consultation process on the outcomes. People were thinking, well, you know, we can't have such, you know, grand outcomes because we're not going to get there. But the critical thing is you can measure over time, you know, over a year, 2 years, 3 years, you can measure progress towards those indicators, getting better. And I think the other thing I'd say, Mr. Maskey, is that as well as the statistical indicators, it's always really important to take the views of children, people and their parents as to, okay, you know, well, some of your indicators are getting better, but in fact what we're finding on the ground is such and such is not getting better. And that's the intelligence that comes from people who, you know about their own lives. So it should be both. But I think we can be ambitious because it's so critical, really. I think we're not. You know, we'd then be content with seeing the next report and the next report and the next report saying, oh, you know, there was no collaboration. Well, why not? You know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much, not just for your session today, but also for your written input. And we note the suggested amendments.
Right.
And I think it seems to be the bill will come forward, but with some significant amendments. And we thank you for your suggestions. Thank you. Members, unless there is any other business, we are going to go into closed session as soon as I say that we will adjourn after that until Wednesday the 22nd at 2 p.m. here in room 30.